Hello, I'm Suzanne Warren, doctoral student in English and creative writing at the University of Cincinnati. I'm interviewing Leah Stewart, assistant professor of English, also at the University of Cincinnati, and author of 3 novels, Body of a Girl, The Myth of You and Me, and her latest, Husband and Wife. Welcome, Leah. Your first novel, Body of a Girl, draws on your experience as a journalist. You were an undergrad journalism major at Vanderbilt University, and I believe you worked as a journalist. How's that journalism background shaped your fiction writing?
I was mostly an intern. I interned during the school year, and I was the editor of the college paper. And then I interned in the summers, first with the Nashville Tennessean, and then with the Commercial Appeal, which is the daily paper in Memphis. Mm-hmm. And by the time I finished that experience, I knew I didn't actually want to be a reporter, and then I was at something of a loss. Thus, I went straight out of college to the MFA program. So I think it obviously informed that first book because the character was a reporter, and I think because the character was a reporter and it's in present tense, it ended up being written in perhaps a more journalistic style, a little bit more of a clipped style than I think you see in my later books.
Okay. So the character of Cameron in The Myth of You and Me, your second novel, is an Air Force brat. The nomadic lifestyle, it's a major shaping influence on her character. You also are a child of a military family. Do you think that's influenced your fiction writing in any way?
I do, and I think one of the ways it's really influenced my writing is in creating, in part, what I write about, so that it's an effort for me to write about setting. I have to make a point of writing about setting, and I think perhaps partly for that reason I end up emphasizing the setting, because I'm aware that I don't naturally necessarily think about it. And I think that that when you grow up moving a lot, you make your home out of the relationships in your family, and also out of establishing relationships in the new place where you live. And certainly as a writer, I'm really interested in and have been focused on the nuances of interaction and relationships, and some of that may have been shaped by growing up that way, as opposed to writers who are regional, who are interested in the culture of a particular area or the way things change over time. I have never been rooted in that way to a place, only to people.
That's interesting. You've noted in other interviews that the unknowability of those closest to you is a recurrent theme for you. In Body of a Girl, the narrator compares people to Russian dolls, infinitely layered. Can you say more about this notion of the mystery of human character?
I don't think I'm alone in being interested in that idea, and even in exploring it kind of obsessively, but it does seem to be something that recurs a lot in my work, even in the new book, where the point is partly that no matter how well you know someone, there is always something you don't know. And I think every book needs, as I once heard Barry Hannah say, people, danger, and mystery. And I think that if you write largely about relationships, then an interaction, then that danger and that mystery come from our inability to ever know anyone else completely, so that no matter how close someone is to you, they can always surprise you.
One of the things I love about your books is that you're great at unconventional pairings. So, for example, in Body of a Girl, there's a relationship between the 20-something heroine and a high school boy. It's not consummated, but still it's a romance. And then in Husband and Wife, there's a relationship between Sarah Price, the narrator, and her husband's best friend, Smith. So in both cases, these relationships, I found them intensely uncomfortable to read about, sometimes funny, but at the same time, I really found myself rooting for these couples. So it was really kind of a fascinating experience as a reader. Can you say more about these unconventional and memorable pairings?
I think one of the things that I'm interested in is taking a character who has been trying to abide by certain rules, either rules that that have been imposed on her, rules that she set for herself, who then begins to flout those rules. I think that happens in all my books, but perhaps particularly the first one in the new one, and that an inappropriate coupling is one of the ways to flout those rules. I mean, that character in the first book gets up to a lot of stuff that she probably shouldn't, and I definitely wanted her to be pursuing a dangerous course and running around with a high school boy who's not just a high school boy, but a high school boy who is mixed up in drug culture, becomes the sort of her breaking of the rules.
In an online piece that appeared on writer Carolyn Leavitt's blog, you tackle the accusation that women write about relationships while men write about, quote-unquote, the great subjects. What you write is, "It's easier for the culture at large," this is a quote from you, "to believe that things matter if they happen to men or are related to men," end quote. Can you say a little more about this idea?
Sure. I'm teaching Bel Canto and Patchett's novel right now, and I was reading some interviews with her in order to do that, and she mentioned a positive review of Bel Canto, which is her fourth novel, that praised the book as being, quote, real literature, as opposed to her first three books, which in this male reviewer's eyes were women's fiction.
Huh.
And she was saying, in saying this is real literature, you're basically saying, this is what I was interested in. I wasn't interested in what you wrote about in your first three books. And I think one of the differences is that those first three books are more personal. They don't have the scope or the sort of narrative grandeur of Bel Canto that basically announces, I am intelligent. And I think that one of the difficulties that women writers face is not even perhaps so much overt sexism anymore as ingrained perceptions that color how we read what we read. So that when we read relationship fiction, domestic fiction, whatever you want to call it, by women, we don't presume intelligence. We presume that women are writing about what they know. And if a man, we don't presume it was a deliberate choice. Unless the woman has already proven herself by writing short fiction, say, or something very postmodern, or an obviously ambitious, large-scale book, then we can assume intelligence. But with a male writer, a male literary writer, we are much more likely to assume intelligence. So if that writer chooses to write about a father-son relationship, we think it was a deliberate choice to, demonstrate these nuances and this finely crafted, perhaps quiet story, as opposed to if a woman chooses to write about a mother-daughter relationship, I think the fallback perception often is, well, that's what girls think about.
Another thing you write, and you're quoting a friend here, is, quote, "When is it brave to write about marriage? When a man does it," end quote. Can you talk a little bit about that quote?
End quote. So, can you talk a little bit more about that?
She was responding to reviews of a novel that praised the male writer's bravery in tackling the difficult and thorny subject of marriage. And I think, again, it's just a matter of perception that it's hard to imagine a review of a female writer's book about marriage that praised the bravery of said writer for tackling this.
Last question. What are you working on now?
I'm working on a novel set in Cincinnati.
Mm-hmm.
It is about adult siblings, and it's different from my first three in that I am tackling third person. All three of my first books are first person, and this is third person with three alternating points of view.
What are the genders?
One's a man. 2 women and a man.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Suzanne.